Want entertainment designed just for you? Then check out customizable streaming TV from Xfinity. It makes your life simple, easy, awesome.
Xfinity gives you customizable streaming TV options. Enjoy the most free shows anywhere on any device, and even access your streaming apps right on your TV with X1. Go to Xfinity.com, call 1-800-XFINITY, or visit a store today to learn more. Restrictions apply.
WPHAT. You're listening to the #1 health and wellness podcast, the place where health and consciousness connect. Perfectly Healthy and Tone Radio with your host, Darren McDuffie. And now, prepare to get fat. What's up, peeps, and welcome to an episode of Perfectly Healthy and Tone Radio. I am your show host, Darren McDuffie, alias Fat Man, because I help you become perfectly healthy and toned. Today's show is a really awesome show I did with Julia Ross on her book, The Mood Cure. This book was written in 2003, and Julia has 2 other books more recently, The Craving Cure, which just came out on December 12th. And I'll have Julia back on to talk about that in the future. But today, again, the book is called The Mood Cure. She has one other book called The Diet Cure, and these deal with depression and addiction. So if you're someone out there who is suffering from depression, you may be fatigued, whatever's going on, we talk about how Julia discovered amino acid therapy to boost the brain's neurotransmitter. And don't let that language throw you off, because we talk a little bit about it and you get an understanding, more and complete understanding about how, again, to boost the brain's neurotransmitters and go on to live a happy, more productive life. Now, before I get into the show, just wanted to give you a few reminders. Please go to perfectlyhealthyandtone.com, click on the store link, and look at the store. In the store, I have a cleanse by Diane Kaiser, and I understand that she's changing the cleanse to be a bit more robust, so you can check that out. And also the SIBO Summit. Summit is no longer active, but you can purchase it because it's a digital product, and you have those experts at your fingertips where you can watch them over and over again. So if you're someone who is suffering from digestive issues and may not have gotten a good explanation from your doctor, I would advise you to go and check out the SIBO Summit. Also, if you have any feedback for the show, if you have any questions, or if you just want to give me a big up, so to speak, you can email me at darren@perfectlyhealthyandtone.com. That's Darren@perfectlyhealthyandtone.com. And if you're listening to this on iTunes, I would appreciate you leave a review. Whether good or bad, leave a review. It helps me out. So now let's get into Julia's bio. Julia Ross is a world leader in the use of nutritional therapy for the treatment of mood problems, eating disorders, and addictions. After 10 years as a psychotherapist working with individual adults and adolescents, families, and groups in a variety of psychiatric and outpatient settings, Ross began to direct programs. Some of her early achievements included the founding of the San Francisco Bay Area's first programs for food addicts and for drug-addicted adolescents and their families. And just as a backstory on this particular show, we've been trying to make this show happen for 3 years. First, my internet was down. We couldn't do the show. And then something happened. We got our wires crossed where Julia did not receive one of my emails. And then she went into writing her other book. So I thought that would just be a little interesting backstory for you before the show. But again, one love. Enjoy the show. Oops, and I almost forgot about what you're going to learn in the show, so check it out. Why is stabilizing blood sugar important for stabilizing mood? Is it possible to balance mood disorders without animal protein in a diet? Very interesting answers for my people out there who are vegan. Are mood disorders ever too far gone to respond to amino acid therapy? What is a guaranteed way to slow down thyroid function and create mood disorders? A lot of people don't know this, and Julia gives a very good answer. Why do women make less serotonin, and now how does that affect them when it comes to depression? And as a bonus, you'll learn why Julia Ross actually likes the ketogenic diet, and one big thing she really loves about this particular diet, and maybe even a drawback as well. So again, enjoy the show. Coincidentally, for this show, I wasn't able to do a Skype interview. Normally, I would do a Skype interview and then add some audio enhancements to the show, so I had to use the Blog Talk platform. For those of you who've been following the show know that in the past, I was just using Blog Talk, and it didn't sound too great. So what I did was download it from Blog Talk and then add the audio enhancements. So it may sound a little bit different from previous shows, but it should sound sound better. Just wanted you to know that. Again, enjoy the show.
Hey, what's up, peeps? This is Darren McDuffie, alias Fat Man, because I help you become perfectly healthy and toned. And it's been my first time doing a live show in a while. For those of you who've been listening to the show know that I usually record the show via Skype and then add some audio enhancements to it so it can sound better. But due to these circumstances tonight, I'm just doing a live show. And what I will probably do is just download this show and, again, add the audio enhancements to it so it can sound a little bit better. But this interview was an interview that I've been wanting to do. It's been in like 2.5, maybe 3 years in the making. We got wires crossed, things happened, and weren't able to do the interview here. But tonight we are finally doing it. And I have Julia Ross, who is the author of The Mood Cure. She's also the author of The Diet Cure. And as of December 12th, she's the author of The Craving Cure, which we'll kind of talk a little bit about tonight, and we'll probably blend the two books together. But Julia Ross, welcome to Perfectly Healthy and Toned Radio. How are you tonight?
I'm fine. Thanks, Darren.
Thank you for coming on. Like I said, this interview has been, 2.5 years, maybe 3 years in the making. Yeah. You and I talked. Man, I think I was working at a food sensitivity testing company,
yes.
And you were one of my clients, and I called you on the phone, and I was like, is this the woman who was talking to Sean Croxton maybe 2 or 3 years ago on the phone? And you and I ended up having like an hour conversation. I remember sitting there at my desk, but I've since moved on from that position. But it was just very enlightening to talk to you about food and mood and everything that was going on. So I'm glad to have you tonight.
Well, I disappeared. Nobody's been able to track me down for the last 3 years, really, because I've been working so hard on my new book. But this time of year, I'm really happy to do an interview that touches on mood, because this is literally the dark time of the year, physically and emotionally for a lot of people.
Yeah, a lot of people are unhappy now with the holidays because maybe they don't have someone, they're not in a relationship, or something happened, and now people are like thinking about all those different things, and a lot of depression going on, a lot of sadness here. But looking back on your background, I usually ask people to talk about their background and how they got into health, but yours is so interesting. I kind of wanted to throw some things out there. You started in 1973 in psychotherapy. How did that career come about? And take us through that and how you started getting into the mood cure and using amino acids and things of that nature.
Well, it was definitely not a straight course. I had a lot of the troubles that a lot of my peers had in the 60s, finding my way, and I ended up working in a psychiatric halfway house as a resident manager through various, friends and family connection, and discovered that I was really good at talking to people and loved it. And so I was there for about 3 years and saved my money and went back to school and went to graduate school, and I was, just in the pink. It was the perfect track for me. I was very happy. But towards the end of my graduate program, I ran out of money. And the only internship that paid was in an addiction treatment program. And talk about depression, I thought, this is going to be the most depressing placement I could ever have, but I need the income, so I'm going to do it. And it turned out to be the most enlightening internship I could have ever had. I learned psychotherapeutic techniques that nobody else was really doing except for psychotherapists in the addiction field, being direct, valuing truth and honesty, and cutting to the chase rather than, keeping it very slow and kind of standard psychotherapeutic jargon. So that was great. And then about 7 years into that, I had converted from intern to employee to supervisor, and I was made director of outpatient programs in this large agency. And right at that same moment, the crack cocaine epidemic broke on us. And instead of having about 50% success rate, which we'd had with the alcoholics who were our primary clients before that moment, we had no success. In 24 hours, we would have 100% of our clients relapsing. And this was true all over the country. So I had to look somewhere else because psychotherapy, and we were really offering the best of all the new psychotherapy, plus 12-step programs. And so I was very, very fortunate at that moment. People in the addiction field were exposed to a whole new perspective on addiction. And that perspective was that it was entirely biochemical and specifically neurochemical. In other words, the nerves in the brain, specifically neurotransmitters, which I know we'll talk about later, determine our moods and our appetite, our ability to experience pleasure. And to summarize quickly, one of the scientists who was a leader in this, in the brain scientists who were studying addiction, did some clinical studies showing that the amino acids or protein constituents that these pleasure-producing, mood-generating parts of the brain depended on, there were only 5 of them, were deficient, and that was why people were experiencing negative moods and being drawn to addictive substances and then developing cravings. And he did some studies showing that giving people, his studies were pretty low dose. He wasn't a clinician. He just decided to use low doses of the well-known amino brain fuels, made a huge difference. So I had a nutritionist on staff. I was very interested in nutrition, but in terms of diet, getting very far, because most of our clients, when they tried to give up drugs and alcohol, their craving for sugar went through the roof and they weren't able to improve their diet, but we were trying. And those few people who could improve their diet did much better. However, I decided we were going to do a pilot project using the amino acids, and we ended up using stronger doses than the pilot project and found that we got even better results with with alcoholics, with the pot addicts, with the opiate addicts that were coming in. So a couple of years later, when I started a program for food addicts on the Overeaters Anonymous model, but providing counseling and nutritional therapy, we decided to use the same nutrients, and we got even better results. So I just couldn't look back. I was a psychotherapist, and I was forced to become an expert in neuronutrition, brain fueling, care and feeding, nutritional care and feeding of the brain, and the specific sites that determine our mood state and our ability to generate a normal appetite.
Has it been your experience with psychotherapy? Because I've had people on before who had talked about psychotherapy, and it seems to me as though they started like you started, but they realized that the psychotherapy wasn't working. It was something that they needed to go to that was a little bit further. And it sounds like you were going towards that too, because you experienced the failure rates with alcoholism and drug addiction. But for someone who's addicted to alcohol or drugs or whatever it is it advantageous for them to go through psychotherapy, or should they be looking at wholly something biochemical causes?
Well, there's no reason not to do both, but now it's clear to me, and it's clear. See, this development occurred before Prozac came on, so antidepressants were not a big deal in those days. So people didn't have much of an option if their mood was negative. Now, other than psychotherapy, now we know that the biochemistry is the primary problem. So let's address that first, because that takes 24, 48 hours to rule out. If that doesn't solve, most of the problem, then psychotherapy may be in order. And in any case, once you have the brain chemistry organized, and once your mood is your own and not caused by some aberration in your brain chemistry, then you can decide, okay, I have been through a lot and I'm very stable now, but I'd like to straighten out, some of those relationship tangles I've been in. I'd like to do some family or couple counseling. Then it's very, very productive, incredibly productive. One of the things I talk about in the Mood Cure right in the beginning is that when we started working with food addicts, they were almost all women, and almost all of them had early childhood sexual and other traumatizing abuse histories. And so they were asking the same question, and we were saying what all people in the addiction field tend to say, which is, let's get you stabilized first, off the substances, kind of leveled out in a basic day-to-day way, and then you'll have the strength to face these things. Otherwise, they're going to propel you right into relapse. So we said the same thing. And our clients said, well, that would be okay, except that we keep on thinking about it. Who are we supposed to talk about this stuff to, if not our counselors? So finally, after months of that, and meanwhile, they're on the aminos, they're on the diet, and they're doing really well. So we thought, okay, let's do an experiment. Let's, for a month, open up, these doors and do some counseling on early childhood trauma. And if it results in relapse, we know we've entered that realm too early. But if not, it could be very, very useful to get it out of their system now, and maybe with the support of the nutrient program, they'll be more stable in the face of it. And sure enough, we had not one relapse. And our people not only didn't relapse, but they went through the process of clarifying and recovering from the early trauma twice as fast as the clients, who waited a year into sobriety to tiptoe into that realm. So I hope that answers your question. It could be both.
Yeah, it does, because
start with the brain
both.
and that chemistry.
Yeah, start with do a combination. So that does answer my question. You wrote your book in 2003, and
The Mood Cure, right?
The Mood Cure. And you took some time off to write this book, obviously, the new book, The Craving Cure, which we'll kind of talk about near the end of the interview. I'm going to assume you're still doing the work and seeing people in your clinic. Is it getting better, or is it getting worse?
Well, we don't get anybody who doesn't have mood problems, basically, but so I can't tell you too much about the population out there. They're using more and different antidepressants, so the SSRIs, the first batch, starting with Prozac, aren't enough. Now there are others that are being used, and so I would say in general things are getting worse. What we have seen, and this is since the Mood Cure came out, I would say it came out in late 2003, and by 2007, about 3.5 years later, we went into the major recession, and there was that whole financially driven mood problem that was unleashed on us, making all the biochemistry, even more vulnerable in the brain. And what we found was that we were getting a huge number of people with undiagnosed functional bipolar spectrum disorders. So they were functioning, and they just thought they were moody. They didn't realize that they had a cyclical back and forth that actually was a result of a mood chemistry imbalance that was different than the garden variety depression, anxiety, stress that we deal with simply with the amino acids. So that seems to be a big new development, that the number of people with even more complex brain chemistry issues is increasing, and that shouldn't be a big surprise, because the bipolar spectrum, so manic depression is one extreme, and then we've got fairly minor mood swings at the other, and that whole dynamic is known to be genetically driven. And our diet is so destructive to, our genetic programming, in addition to everything else, that it's no wonder that we're having an increase in genetically derived problems that we weren't seeing nearly as much of before.
Yeah, I wanted to talk to you about that, because when we dealing with nutrition, and I've been studying nutrition for a number of years, one of the things in nutrition is nothing is genetic when it comes to nutrition, when it comes to illness. Let's say you don't get high blood pressure because your mom had it, you don't get cancer because someone else had it, but
that's right. Degenerative diseases are not genetic.
Oh,
that's right.
Yes, I wanted to make
but there
that
are some other conditions that are. There are some physical illnesses that are genetically transmitted. But we're certainly more likely to get anything that's genetically transmitted if our diet isn't good. But it's the degenerative diseases, the heart disease and the diabetes, of all things, greater than anything, that have nothing to do with genetics, that never existed. In the 1960s, there was less than 2% of the population diabetic. Now it's over 50%.
Wow.
That is not a genetic dynamic, that's for sure.
Yeah, that's just a food-related dynamic. I was just talking to a cousin the other day when I was traveling and had some news, and on one side of my family, it just seems like there are some mood-related problems. And it started with the mother, and then it went to the daughter, and then it went to the younger daughter, and all of them seem to have the same thing. So, my question was around that, the whole genetic thing and passing these mood-related orders down. And then with what you're doing now, is there come a point when it's too far gone, like can't use aminos? You have to use... There's never a point when it's too far gone.
There's never a point if you have a simple deficiency of neurotransmitters. There's never a point where it gets too serious. But you can have other brain chemistry disorders and imbalances that are different. And bipolar disorder is one of them. Psychosis is another one. And they just don't respond in the same way. So, for example, if we get somebody who's bipolar or psychotic, they're typically, the psychotic clients who have come to us have been on medication, and they still don't feel that good, but they're not feeling crazy. And we can really help them as long as they're on a medication that is taking care of that part of the brain that we don't as yet know how to correct nutritionally. I'm convinced that if we had any sort of a budget to explore the nutritional remedies for serious mood disorders, we would have solved them a long time ago. But right now, we certainly don't know how to prevent a psychotic break or that kind of severity of brain disorder or a bipolar disorder. So we can assist with the part of these disorders that have to do with not having enough neurotransmitter activity, but that's not the only thing that can happen to the brain. That is by far the most common cause of depression and anxiety, overstress, unexplained oversensitivity and loneliness, fatigue and poor attention. That all those things are the most common mood problems that exist, and they are very easily addressed physiologically, nutritionally with these amino acid therapies.
Yeah, you just described probably about 99% of population.
That's right.
Yeah, about 99% of population, because I guess interviewing other people and just studying, the biggest complaint when someone goes to the doctor is fatigue. So that describes most of the population there. When you're working with someone who has psychosis or bipolar, are you using amino acids in combination with that to help them feel a little bit better? Okay.
Yeah, we've been very fortunate. There's a local psychiatrist who has come to my trainings and it loves the nutritional approach, but is not an expert in it herself. What she is an expert in is assessing what kind of brain chemistry imbalance people have and whether or not the nutrients are going to be helpful and if they need to be combined. And what we've found over time is that they almost always need to be combined with bipolar, with low-dose medication. So what we've learned is that people can get on a dose that's so low that they don't have side effects, but they have to be on something that will stabilize that chemistry that tends to swing. We can increase the positive moods, but we can't stop the neurotransmitters from their shifting if they're going up and down. And that's something that medication can do pretty well, and most of our clients have been able to do wonderfully on a combination of amino acids and a medication that's a mood stabilizer. It's a whole class of medicine, psychiatric medication that most people never get near because most doctors and psychotherapists and psychologists and general public are so afraid of the whole idea of having a bipolar diagnosis that they don't even go there, let alone try the medication. A lot of psychiatrists, of course, start at very high doses and frighten people away too. But so this is what we've learned since 2007. The only people that were coming to us, during the recession were people who were so desperate because their mood problems were more complicated. And it took us a while to figure out, hey, this is a new of mood problems that's slightly different. Some overlap, and finally we figured it out. And so there's some good solutions, and nutrition is key. People who are bipolar need a stable diet, and they need a well-balanced diet to balance that brain chemistry out and keep it in order.
I don't want to put the audience, but I wanted to ask this question because it's very intriguing to me. But from a perspective of ethnicity, because I know in a book you talk about, I believe one gentleman was Native American, and he came in, but from a position of ethnicity, you've seen everybody on the spectrum, Native American, I'm sure you've seen African Americans, you've seen
Asian.
Caucasians, Asians, in California, you have a big population there.
Yeah.
But from a perspective of ethnicity, are there any groups that are more susceptible to having these mood disorders versus another group?
Well, I would still say that the Native Americans are the most sensitive of all to toxic food. They've been exposed to it the most recently, but African Americans are next because they've only been exposed to it, a little longer, coming over here, being exposed to European food and alcohol. So, but we've worked a lot with Native Americans because their response is so incredible, and the drums started beating that there was a solution, and Native Americans are, they're living right, out here anyway, near the lands where they originated, and so they know what they used to eat. And they know that it was a paleo diet, essentially, and that they could adapt to certain foods. But one of our clients was in his middle 20s, and he had actually been raised by his grandmother, and she fished for him, and she dug up tule bulbs, and she processed acorns, and they ate the traditional Indian diet. And then when his parents took him back, they introduced, more conventional food, and he turned into an alcohol and drug addict, which is what they were. But his grandmother was living on traditional food, never got into any trouble at all. So he was delighted with the idea of nutrition because he knew from his own life, there was another way of eating. And sure enough, he had a wonderful experience with us. I talk about him in both of my first books, The Diet Cure and The Mood Cure.
Yeah, I remember that. We talked about, and we're throwing around a lot of jargon here about neurotransmitters. Talk about what a neurotransmitter is and just take us through I think it's 4 of them. Just take us through the 4 of them and
sure.
What they do.
Well, we know, everybody pretty much knows that the brain runs the show, whether it's breathing, digesting, whatever it is, the brain is regulating everything. And mood and pleasure in response to sensations, like the sensation of eating, of getting a hug, of seeing a sunset, whatever, all of that pleasure chemistry is generated in the brain too. And what's extraordinary is both our mood and our ability to experience pleasure is regulated by the same 4 kinds of cells in the brain. These are special cells that send out messages of magic messages, really, of happiness, of satisfaction, and there are 4 of them. So we get 4 different kinds of happiness and 4 different kinds of pleasurable response. So it's a very rich array, and I consider them like the crown jewels of the brain, are these special cells that are called neurotransmitters, because they transmit through these little nerve cells these incredible sensations. And so when we're well fed and, only, moderately stressed by life being sort of by definition stressful always, from what I can gather, we can generate positive mood and really enjoy the most basic food tremendously. But if we're not well fed, or our stress level has gone completely over the moon, or both, which is what's going on now, poor food and too much stress, then those neurotransmitters get underfed, and they start to their function becomes subnormal. And what that means is, instead of transmitting kind of a baseline feeling of well-being, just wake up in the morning, hit the street and whistle, that used to be pretty standard, because, that was a normal feeling, is to have a pretty good sense of well-being. But with this deficiency now, we've developed, negative moods. Instead of positive or neutral, we are negative, and that's these negative moods we experience are specific neurotransmitter deficiency symptoms. And what are the neurotransmitters deficient in? They're deficient in, each one is dependent on a particular protein or amino acid, and they're deficient in the supplies of that amino acid. Now, the deficiency is really accelerated since the 1970s, when we added a whole new type of sugar, which has even more powerful brain effect than table sugar had. And our intake of table sugar had been going up regularly every decade from the 1900s on, but we still didn't have a weight problem or degenerative disease or serious mood problems until after 1970, which is when we were introduced to high fructose corn syrup, high fructose agave syrup, high fructose fruit syrup, and they have a more powerful brain effect and body effect than the table sugar. So our ability to maintain our neurotransmitters has really been challenged. And because these foods are so addictive, we're eating less and less of the protein that is our only source of amino acid fuel for these neurotransmitters. In the 70s, we became very suspicious of red meat or any meat because it contained saturated fat. And there was a big push towards vegetarianism then, because we were very impressed with the gurus from India who were advocating a vegetarian
Can I stop you right there? Because I really want to ask you a question about that. Because
sure.
In the book, I know that you talk about eating meat, and it just seems like as a culture, there's not a day that I'm not on Facebook or something where someone is telling us not to eat meat. But I guess my question is you...
They never say why, except for ethical reasons.
Yes, but you work with people all the time. Is it possible, and I'm not picking out my vegans out there. If you're a vegan, by all means, it's all good. But is it possible to balance the brain chemistry without having some type of animal protein in your diet?
I'm sure it is. We don't see people who have been able to do that because obviously it wouldn't come to us, if they were doing well. And in almost every case, we've had to say, let's start with the amino acids, but we don't know what long-term dependence on amino acids would do because our clients typically take the amino acids for a certain number of months, don't need it anymore because they've increased their dense protein intake using animal protein, and they feel terrific, and they don't have any cravings, and they can maintain that without the additional amino supplementation. So, what we say, we tell them that. We say, we don't know whether you're going to be able to do as well if you, remain vegan or even vegetarian in a lot of cases. So what happens is, we give them the aminos, they experience an improvement, but they're still low energy, and quite often they just don't have the stamina and the vitality that they're looking for, and they're completely dependent on the aminos and can't go off of them. And we tell them, we don't know if it's even safe to take aminos, indefinitely. What kind of a diet is it that requires you to take, heavy supplementation for life? It's clearly not a really health-sustaining diet. If it's missing these critical nutrients. So we ask them to introduce eggs, and they're usually okay with that, and just as an experiment. If this doesn't help them, then okay, they know that. But invariably, they feel so much better. Some of them, the first time they have red meat, they can actually feel it changing their brain chemistry, and they can feel the energy. And so we are omnivores. That means we need both animal and plant-based foods. That's my conclusion, and I think what we really need is to get some perspective, some historical perspective on nutrition. When our bodies, when our weight, when our level of degenerative disease was almost nil, we were eating meat and saturated fat and vegetables and fruits and other plant matter. It's only now, since things have gone so bad, that we've been experimenting with more restrictive diets. We're on low-calorie diets, which are, not enough of any food, and then we've gone low protein and low saturated fat. So we're just doing this radical experimentation, whereas we can view the whole history of mankind for 2 million years as a largely meat-based culinary tradition, with lots of variations and combinations and amounts. So, does that answer your question?
Yeah, that does, because I think when you look at society now, it's just this war going on between the meat eaters and the vegans, and like you said, it's more of an ethical thing. And there's really, for me, I think that you can look for any science to support any argument that you want to have. It's clearly obvious that people have been doing that for a very long time. So that answers the question. Just off the cuff, Julia, what is your thought? You mentioned paleo before, but there's a real big interest in the ketogenic diet. I don't know if you've heard of that, but if
sure.
you have,
it's been big since Atkins, late 70s.
Yeah. So what are your thoughts on that? Because I know that seems to be the new thing. Because first it was paleo, and then now everybody's kind of branching out and going into ketogenic diet. Have you had any experience with that working with people in your clinic?
Yeah, we've had some people coming to us who've been, who've done both, who've done, 10 or 20 different things. And the real problem that they have universally is that they can't stay on any of it. They typically feel pretty good on a paleo diet or a ketogenic diet, but as I say, they can't stay on it because what they crave is the carbs, and they crave, and sometimes it's because they're not eating enough carbs. I mean, we always ate carbs along with meat, but roots, and we had fruit. But depending, what part of the world we're talking about. But what they find with a ketogenic diet, in addition to wanting the carbs, which throw everything off, is, and that's where the aminos come in, and that's why I wrote the Craving Cure, so that people could stay away from the carbs and go towards, a diet that was going to really, restore their health. But one of the other problems the ketogenic diet attempters find, come to us anyway, is that they become really sort of disgusted with fat. They just can't eat anymore. They're trying to eat too much, these fat balls and so forth. It's not just part of the meals. It's an additional amount of fat that a lot of people push themselves to ingest, and they develop an aversion. And that's really too bad because, fat is marvelous. And we've always been done very well on it. But again, it really is the balance and individualization. What's right for us as individuals? We come from a genetic hodgepodge, geographic hodgepodge. Got to be careful. We can't just follow somebody else's idea and assume that it's going to work for us.
Yeah, it's all on the individual basis. You have to find out what works for you. This is a question I'm going to ask you because no one has ever been able to answer it for me. And I saw it pop up in your book again. Women produce less serotonin, which is the happy drug for the brain. And I've never been told why women produce less serotonin. I'm going to ask you that question, see if you have an answer. And because they produce less serotonin, I'm going to assume that this is why women are more susceptible to things like depression and anxiety. And you can tell me if I'm right or wrong on that.
Oh, no, I think you're right, and I think it's a fascinating dynamic, but it isn't only serotonin that women produce less of. It's also endorphin, so our natural pleasure-producing, pain-killing. They both are dependent on a particular balance of estrogen and progesterone with the other hormones. And, women don't have a balance. By our very nature, we have to be unbalanced in our childbearing years, so that estrogen progesterone levels go up and down. And as we have become less and less well since the 1970s, our hormonal balance has been really diminished. We've got these epidemics of PCOS and infertility, and we're just so deficiency of hormones is a big problem. And one of the reasons that everyone becomes somewhat hormonally deficient, even males now, is that the more stress we're under, the more the adrenal glands, which produce all of our hormones, even the sex hormones, in addition to what's produced in the ovaries and testes. But under stress, they just get derailed, and they've got to just make the stress hormones. Let's make adrenaline and cortisol. Forget about all the others. So our estrogen production, our progesterone production, testosterone production can all be sidetracked, and the regulation lost, and the optimal levels lost in the fray, literally.
So your hormones can affect your mood, because I know in the book you were talking about you learned some things about hormones, specifically thyroid hormone and other types of hormone, estrogen, progesterone. And what it seems like is that, like you were saying, we have this epidemic. You see more and more women with thyroid problems, and obviously problems with, I've seen women who go into early menopause and different things of that nature. Yes. So yeah, tell us a little bit about hormones and how that plays in a role in our mood, because the big joke is don't mess with a woman on PMS, but you're starting to see a lot of men with mood-related problems, because I myself used to be really moody. And I know a lot of guys who are moody. But what's going on? Yeah. What have you learned about hormones in your clinic?
Well, there are two issues. I mean, men can get protein malnourished and overstressed, and the brain chemistry, the neurotransmitter output just can't keep up with it any more than it can keep up with women's. In terms of thyroid function, women are a lot more susceptible to dysregulation because they've done so much more low-calorie dieting, and that is the guaranteed way to slow down your thyroid is to not eat. It's just a survival mechanism. It's an automatic. At some point, some people can get by with a few diets and bounce back in terms of the metabolic rate, thyroid function, which runs the metabolic rate largely. But eventually, it could be the first diet, it could be the second diet, it could be the fourth diet. They start finding themselves gaining more weight. They go on a starvation diet, they lose some weight, mostly muscle. And then it starts coming back, and it keeps coming back, and they end up regaining more than they ever had to begin with. because their thyroid has been disabled. And it's been disabled for a good reason, because they've been starving. And the body just becomes concerned. We've got to conserve our calories. We can't be burning our own flesh because we're in a state of starvation, and it could go on for years, as famines have sometimes. And that, famine chemistry is what we're talking about here. The thyroid is an integral part of that.
Going into just talking more about, I want to ask this question about blood sugar, because it's very intriguing to me when you talk about blood sugar in the book, of really balancing your blood sugar and how much effect that has on the brain. There was a time, I think 3 or 4 years ago, I was looking at an interview with the Dr. Russell Blaylock, and he was quoting a study. I can't remember the name of the study, but he quoted a study on prisoners. They did a prison, I think Alabama, Mississippi, and in the study, all they did was change these prisoners' diet, and some of those gentlemen who were prisoners got out and they never committed crime again. So in relation to that, and talking about hypoglycemia, which is low blood sugar, I've also heard that people who suffer from hypoglycemia are going to turn towards alcohol to kind of raise up their blood sugar. So how does that affect our moods, and how is food really important? Because you mentioned food a lot in the beginning of the interview, and that's how you and I met, through testing for foods. So how does that all come in, and how does that affect our mood?
Well, the brain is extraordinarily dependent on a very steady and constant blood sugar supply, because there's no place in the brain, there's no room for storage. The muscles have their own, emergency glucose supply right there, but the brain doesn't have that. So if there's not a nice stable amount of glucose circulating as it's supposed to, all through the day and evening, and an adequate amount into the night, those neurotransmitters just don't function as well. They can't burn normally. They can't function normally without their glucose supply, which is their energy supply. So you have your amino acids, but you also need a certain amount of glucose and a stable blood sugar supply. So we find that there are some very specific mood problems that result from, that are just part of hypoglycemia. If you skip a meal, you're not going to feel good in between. You're going to be irritable and more easily stressed. You're going to have trouble with focus. You're going to be headachy. And those are, all some of the common symptoms. You might even get faint, common symptoms of hypoglycemia. And as I say, in addition to those, just direct effects of hypoglycemia, we've got the secondary effects on the neurotransmitters, so that our other providers of a stable mood are not functioning normally because their fuel supply is interrupted. And so we have a marvelous alternative here. It's one of the things I like about the ketogenic diet is there's more fat in it, and the fat is a marvelous stable supply of ketones, which are very much like glucose. And in fact, some parts of the body, like the heart, prefer ketones to glucose. They like that fuel very much. So it's one of the reasons I like meat so much. It's like the perfect food. It has protein in it. It has saturated fat, which can be burned as like a carbohydrate could be, to make a fuel for the body like glucose. It's really a remarkable fuel. But to get back on track, where was I when I made that little digression? Oh, about the blood sugar. So if we're not eating a diet that keeps our blood sugar stable, and we certainly aren't now. Most people don't eat real meals more than once a day now, twice at the most. So there's a lot of low blood sugar juggling going on, and then alternating with blood sugar that's too high when we compensate with high sugar, high starch foods. So what we found that is so remarkable is another amino acid that itself is a magnificent fuel, at least as good as glucose or ketones, for fueling our cells. And it's almost miraculous. We have a protein that can be used as a fuel to make up for glucose lacks, and that amino acid is glutamine, and works instantly to provide the brain with the fuel that it needs, and those hypoglycemic cravings and other negative symptoms just disappear in minutes.
Yeah, talk about, because I was just going to ask you that about the You mentioned glutamine, and glutamine is also good, I've heard, for gut healing as well, which is where the serotonin is produced. Yeah.
Yeah,
Talk
incredible.
about
serotonin, there's more serotonin needed for gut function than for brain function by about 90 to 10%.
Yeah, talk about some of those other amino acids that help with
the other neurotransmitters.
Mood. Yeah, with the other neurotransmitters. And then I guess the second part of that question, because I know we're getting up here on time, is, and maybe you can answer this one first. If someone is addicted to alcohol, drugs, even coffee, is that a kind of a warning sign that something's going on with the neurotransmitters?
Oh, absolutely. There's nobody addicted to those kinds of substances who doesn't have a neurotransmitter deficiency problem. If they were producing normal amounts of neurotransmitters, they would feel terrific. They would have no need for drugs or alcohol. But the same exact thing is true for the drug sugar, especially now that it's more than half of the sugar we take in is this high fructose stuff. So we're being drugged by our diet now, and all of the science concurs. All the brain science now is saying, yep, it's exactly the same dynamic. We see the same thing on the brain scans after they've had sugar as after they've had heroin or alcohol or cocaine, whatever. So correcting that brain chemistry is the first order of business for anybody struggling with an addiction problem. And in the Craving Cure, although the primary target of my new book is food craving and sugar and refined food addiction, all of the same guidelines for the use of amino acids apply, whether the substance that is addicting you is sugar and or alcohol or opiates or cocaine or pot or whatever. So there are 4 amino acids, one for each of the neurotransmitters that could be deficient. And we've got a brilliant questionnaire. Been developing it over 30 years. I've used it to guide our successful treatments with over 4,000 food addicts and many alcohol and drug addicts as well. And my books all begin with a questionnaire that we've developed so that you know which parts of your own brain chemistry are in trouble. You may not need all 5 of the amino acids. Maybe your blood sugar is okay, but it's only the serotonin that's off. And it's very easy to determine that by the deficiency symptoms that are well known for each of the neurotransmitters. And so the questionnaire takes about 5 minutes. And then you've got this life-saving information. And then when you know which neurotransmitters you need to refuel, then you just go into the books and it's very easy to find what fuel they need, which amino acid, for example. If serotonin is a problem, especially around this time of year, because serotonin is a neurotransmitter that is enhanced by light. So at the dark times of the year, physiologically, everybody's serotonin levels drop. That's really why this is such a difficult time of year, and people reach for the junk food and reach for alcohol and so forth even more than usual. But we can take a sunny amino acid, tryptophan, it comes in 2 forms, plain tryptophan or 5-hydroxytryptophan, 5-HTP, and we get, within 24 hours, we've got a tremendous relief of the mood issues, the cravings, all of it is relieved, and fine-tuning the amino acids, we can get rid of all of the symptoms. And so...
With the amino acids, I found this really intriguing as well in the book, that you don't have to take them all the time. Like for most medications, when we're depressed, if someone on a depression medication, it feels like they have to take them all the time. But with the amino acids...
And for life.
Yeah, for life. With the amino acids, you said in the book that you will balance out and you'll know when to stop taking them. And I thought that was very enlightening.
Well, it's the Craving Cure in particular has such detailed instructions, and the final set of instructions for each of the amino acids is, when do you quit taking it? And so after a few months on a regular basis, whatever amino acid you need, you just stop. And if your symptoms come back, whether it's in 24 hours or 2 weeks, then you know you've stopped a little prematurely, and you go back on for a while, and then, after a few months you stop again, and by that time you probably won't need it anymore. All of this being contingent, though, on having adopted a diet that has adequate amounts of protein for you and your brain's needs.
And so the Craving Cure, it came out December 12th of this year, and I'm going
2 days ago.
2 days
Perfect
ago.
timing.
That was Tuesday. And I'm going to put some information out on my page about this, and I would love to have you back on to talk about this as well, because I know that this is probably an amalgamation of the mood cure, the diet cure, and now you have the craving cure. And it looks like, I haven't gotten a chance to read it, but it looks like from really going through it that it's a lot. It's kind of like a progression from things that you learned from the first two books. Like it's a little bit more in depth and kind of like a little bit more, to me, a little bit more simplified, if I can say that. Which is always good.
There's more detail in how to use the aminos, so that you don't have to guess and experiment with yourself as much. And everybody should know that there's a cravingcure.com, a website that has the introduction of the book and the table of contents, so you can get an idea of it. It also has a questionnaire. So that's kind of a fun thing to look at while you're deciding whether you want to order the book or not.
Yeah, so if we are craving, I asked you a question about drugs and alcohol and all that stuff, but if we are craving stuff, that says something about our mood as well, right?
Oh, in terms of food?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. When we're craving junk food, that's a desperate cry from our brain saying we are starving for something to make us feel good. And although junk food has no nutritional value, or very little other than calories, it has a brain effect. So it sort of forces those brain sites in the brain to produce, some serotonin or endorphin or whatever, GABA, whatever we're deficient in, just briefly. And we get a big, pleasant experience from it, but then we go back to below normal. And so we naturally crave, because we know the difference. We feel terrific under the influence, and we don't feel good without it. But if we can take these amino acids, fix those brain sites, then we can generate normal amounts of positive mood. We don't need the junk food, the comfort food, or the highs from alcohol and drugs.
So it seems to me, and this is my last question, it seems to me that from a perspective of food is really important in combination with the amino acids to really get yourself back in balance and get your mood back in balance. And for the gist of the population, most of us are still eating a lot of junk food, and therefore the offshoot of that is that our moods are not stable, and you're seeing that consistently in society when people are out there just going off for no reason. They get mad at a hair trigger, or most of the society is depressed. Is that a fair assumption?
It is. And when you think that we're pretty much alternating between a lot of junk food, which doesn't feed the brain, but just drugs it for temporary, satisfaction, but we alternate that with low-calorie dieting, where we don't eat enough of anything. You can see how we're really in a very strange, high-calorie starvation mode, and in that kind of state, you can't generate positive mood, you can't generate positive genetic programming. It's just not possible. Optimal function depends on optimal diet.
Yeah, it's just reading your book just made me more aware of why men are moody and having emotional problems, and why you see a lot of women who are still having a lot of emotional battles with depression and all kinds of other things, mainly diet.
Sure, panic, anxiety.
Yeah, you see that a lot. It's a number one complaint.
It's just inevitable. We can't eat a nutrient-free diet and expect to function well. But somehow we have thought that our mood was sort of independent of our bodies. We thought of it as just psychological. If life's going good, then we'll feel good. But it turns out that's not true. Even if things are going well, we don't necessarily feel good if our brain isn't well fueled.
Mm-hmm. The brain is good. And the Craven Cure was out December 12th, which was Tuesday. And I think you mentioned earlier about the site. Tell us the site again to go to in order to be able to.
cravingcure.com.
Okay.
To get the questionnaire and to read something from the book to get a sense of it.
Okay.
I'm assuming that it's on a site that has all of the information, all the books on it. So you can just, go right from looking at Craving Cure to Mood Cure or Diet Cure.
Yeah. And like All of my books, I get them from Amazon. So I'm assuming you can go to Amazon or
Sure.
Barnes and Nobles and order the book there if you are someone who is suffering from craving. But I would advise everybody and recommend everybody get all 3 of your books, because I know
Thank
the
you.
Mood Cure has so much information in there.
Yeah.
About
if mood is an
lifting
issue, yeah, it's really an important one. And the Diet Cure has a lot of information that neither of the other books have in it. For example, about thyroid. It's one of the few, I can say this honestly, one of the few sources of good information on how to assess your thyroid function and what to do about it if it's not optimal.
Yeah, it's a lot of women out there that have thyroid issues, and I think men have some thyroid issues as well. But Julia Ross, thank you so much for your time. And like I said, I would love to have you back on to talk about the Craven Cure, because I know that's your newest book, and I know I kind of stretched your brain from a book from 2003, but I thought that the book was really pertinent, because I think it's more pertinent today than it was in 2003, because I know personally a lot of people who are suffering depression, and like we said, with the holidays, that depression seems to escalate even more. So thank you for being on.
Well, it's always a pleasure talking to you, Darren. So I'll be glad to do it again.
Yeah, we got to go get you back in the Craving Cure, and we're going to talk a little bit more about, I didn't get a chance to touch on food sensitivity and allergies, that's how we met.
That would be fun.
Yeah, so when you come back on, we'll get a little bit more in-depth into that. But thank you so much, and enjoy your evening.
Thank you. Enjoy the holidays, Darren.
You too. Happy holidays.
Bye-bye.
Bye. All right, a live show tonight, but I think what I'm going to do is download this show and then actually do some audio enhancements to it just to make it sound a little bit better, because I know when I used to do the shows live, the audio was not always the best, and that's why I went to really recording things on Skype. So hopefully you got something out of the show with the Mood Cure, something that I'm going to do. I used to do it, and I need to probably go back on this 5-HTP, which she talked about, but probably start doing it myself again, I'm always in a pretty even mood, but I know I have my cravings now and then as well, and would love to knock those out. So hopefully you enjoyed the show. This has been Darren McDuffie, alias Fat Man, helping you become perfectly healthy and toned. I'll see you next time. Thank you.
Want entertainment designed just for you? Then check out customizable streaming TV from Xfinity. It makes your life simple, easy, awesome.
Xfinity gives you customizable streaming TV options. Enjoy the most free shows anywhere on any device, and even access your streaming apps right on your TV with X1. Go to Xfinity.com, call 1-800-XFINITY, or visit a store today to learn more. Restrictions apply.
When we take care of our own hearts, we're also taking care of the people closest to us. So it's comforting to know that RWJ Barnabas Health has New Jersey's most comprehensive cardiac care program, with access to top specialists, minimally invasive heart surgery options, and rehabilitation and wellness programs. So get your heart checked. It's as easy as visiting rwjbh.org/heart. RWJ Barnabas Health. Let's be healthy together.